My name is Stoney Shaw. I'm the pastor, or I was the pastor, in Ferguson during the time of the upheaval and the rioting that took place. As we were talking earlier, is that I think that things happen, especially from a Christian point of view, to help repair. And so some of the things that took place in Ferguson were, terrible, needless to say. But then it's where then God leads us to be healing, forces of care. And so a lot of things just happen to us. And then what is going to be our response? And so as a pastor, I naturally got together with other pastors, black and white. And one of the things that came out of that was the desire to take back the ground. All of a sudden, the whole city is in uproar, and police and rioting and all kind of narratives rode in on the back of Michael Brown. And a lot of them were not good narratives. There were some terrible things that actually took place, and people were hurt, things were destroyed. But then, being a healing element, which the church should be, and I believe that's going to be the key, is God's people responding like He would respond if He was here. And we know, of course, He is here. So He guides us to do these things. And so a lot of things took place around our church. And the reason is because we were the largest church. And so the city came to us and said, well, can we use your facility to hold these meetings, even the meeting of Justice Department. And so then we had people from all areas come into our church, and we would have meetings where the city council would sit and listen to the people. And what I came to realize, even though our church was 35% black, 65% white, is that there was a lot of grievances. And it just seemed like that this was an opportunity for all those grievances to boil up and boil out. And so what do you do with that? Well, both black and white pastors came together, and we wanted to make a difference. We wanted to regain the ground. In battle, that's always important, is to have the good ground, the higher ground. And I think we did that. And we came together and created the Ferguson Declaration, and then ended it with a time of bringing in a top-notch African-American pastor, Tony Evans, from Dallas, Texas. And in that, we wanted to show that we not only loved each other, but we realized we needed to work together. And it was a wonderful experience. We got all kind of other news agents would come in. I was interviewed from so many different ones, and the Black Entertainment Network wanted to interview me. And I really think this is important to say. The first thing the young African-American newsman asked me, would I let Reverend Sharpton preach in my church? And I said, absolutely. And he was kind of surprised, and he said, really? I said, yes, if he would commit to preach only out of the Bible. So we had some fun with that. But there was other times, it was wonderful in the sense of the anger, the hurt that came out. And so like being a white person, I had no idea all that was laying out there in the hearts of people. But I've learned too that things stack on top of each other, and that we have to find out what is the real source. Why are you angry? Why are you bitter? Why do you feel the way you feel? And we had a lady one night in our church. We asked people, say what you want to say, but do not curse, do not slander. And so this one lady afterwards, she said, if you white people are nervous, we're going to make you more nervous. So at the end of that meeting, I went to her and I said, could you help me out with that? Why, if you don't enjoy being hurt, why do you want to hurt back? And so it was times like this that we really got to the essence of where the bitterness, where the hurt, and how it had grown. You know, somebody might have had an experience. Well, they were stopped by the police and maybe charged too much or whatever. And then to say, well, how did you let that get you to the point that you're willing to hurt somebody else? You don't like being hurt. So, you know, we had moments like that I think was very good, because we started looking at each other's eyes. We started talking to each other out of the heart. And it helped me so much as a pastor to, you know, it's just not things that are burning. And others could tell you that a lot of those things came from the outside. They weren't in Ferguson. We had a lot of anger come from the outside using Ferguson for their own benefit. And I'm sure you can find out about that. So we, as pastors, would come together, pray together, and then we came to this idea of the Ferguson Declaration. Mr. Bott of the Bott Radio Network is all over the Midwest, and he actually came into Ferguson and wanted to help us to get that expressed. So that's why we started working together, that we wanted to have a time of really celebration where different people would speak and be an encouragement and to uplift and to talk about working together. And so that turned out to be really great. We had an evening in a larger church, larger than our church, and where we had Tony Evans come in from Dallas, Texas, and then Aeneas Williams it was an All-Pro for the St. Louis Rams, and myself, and we had a chance to speak and to share and to have a celebration of God's people coming back together. And so I feel we did. I felt we took the higher ground. And there's so many other things that took place that were negative. So we wanted to be a positive influence. And I think we did. This whole thing of hearing each other, understanding each other, trying to really come to an understanding helped a great deal, I think, in drawing us closer together as a people, black and white or whatever. But to understand each other, I think that's the key. I always tell in marriage counseling, the most important thing for a husband and wife is to understand each other. But I think that's in every relationship. And so I think we did a good job of that. But let me give you one example. At one of the times with the Justice Department was using our church, and we got into small groups and people would discuss. And there was an African-American gentleman that he was a big guy, and in every group he got in, he said, well, you know, we've been under it for 150 years. And so later on in the evening, I was able to approach him. I let him know who I was. I'm the pastor of the church here. But I was interested in what you were sharing. And he said, what was that? And I said, well, in every group you were in, you mentioned that you all have been under it for 150 years. I said, how have you been under it for 150 years? And immediately he said, slavery. And I said, slavery? I said, did any of your people that you know of, were they slaves? And he said, no, but I've always been told. And I said, well, that's interesting that you are feeling something that you really didn't experience. I said, could you talk to me about that? And he started to get, I think, a little angry at me. And then there was just a resolve. And he said, well, this is what I've always felt. I said, but is it true of you? I said, it seems like to me here in Ferguson that I see people red, yellow, black, and white. Some are driving Mercedes. I'm driving a Chevrolet. So it seems to me that a lot of people have made it. Could we look at that as in a positive way? And it was amazing. I won't go into the whole story, but it was really great. His whole attitude changed. I got more understanding from him about whether it was true or not of him. He felt that. And then we have to give credit to that. Something caused that feeling, that angst, that anger, whatever. And so being Christ ones, I always tell my congregation, I like that term, Christ ones. Being Christ ones, we should be able to really listen to other people. So much has been done for us. What can we do for each other? And so through it all, I think, at least in Ferguson, Missouri, I know we're a hashtag, on TV. People will go, well, the Ferguson effect. And I always ask people, what was that effect? Did you just see the rioting? Or did you see the aftermath? Did you see pastors on their knees and pastors, black and white, hugging each other? And then members of the church going out and serving in the community. One thing, a neat story, is we had people going out cleaning up every day after the riots. And then after about 3 days, we had a team. They got there early. They went out, and in half an hour they came back. And I said, what's the matter? And they said, everything's cleaned up. And so, things like that goes to show that God makes a difference. God makes all the difference in our hearts and minds, and then how we respond to others, and that how then we can really work together, for the glory of God. And that's just not a phrase. My life goes back to, I'm a son of the South, and my dad was a sharecropper with a black sharecropper. And so I know things were different, but we were raised to really care for other people, not to mistreat anybody. So in 1967 in seminary, I marched with Martin Luther King in Louisville, Kentucky, and for open housing. And it was so simple, and I love to tell the story to black and white, is that we were in seminary, we had a 2-year-old son, and we were watching the picketing and rioting in Louisville, Kentucky at that time, in Louisville Theological Seminary. And my wife at supper one night, she said, you're going to go, aren't you? And I said, well, baby, I said, we have a 2-year-old son. There's a black couple in the west end of Louisville that wants the same thing for their little 2-year-old that we want for our 2-year-old. So I think I have to go. So me and one other seminarian went. We were the only white people I saw downtown Louisville. And we walked around the building where we were picketing, and there was Martin Luther King and some of his guys, and he saw us. And we were walking, and I saw him dismiss himself, and he came straight to us, 2 white guys. And so he asked that question. He said, good evening, and we, very nice. And he said, could I ask you a question? We said, surely. He said, why are you boys here? And I told him that story. I said, our boy, 2 years old, it's a black couple with a 2-year-old son, wants the same thing. Now, I'll never forget, he goes, good answer. And then Abernathy and Jesse Jackson ran up to him, and they whispered something, and a big Cadillac pulled up to the curb, and they went and got in the Cadillac and drove off, and then we got arrested. And I remember thinking, as an old Southern boy, something's wrong with this picture. But it was a great experience. And so from those experiences, now, after all these years, me to be the pastor at First Baptist Ferguson was not by accident, I don't think. And so God has ways of really making a difference. I really think every community, black and white pastors, should work together to be together. Now, each one is going to do their own thing at different times, but I wish we in Ferguson had this going really well before the riots. But I find that if we don't do it ourselves, things will cause us to get together. Sometimes because of neglect, and I think it was neglect in Ferguson, that we just went along. I had no idea when I became the pastor in Ferguson that was all laying underneath out there. But and I understood it, that when it exploded, that it was an avenue for people to get their grievances out. And I think both black and white came to understand that, is to say, give people an opportunity to get it out. Now, a lot of it is how they feel. Are they facts to back it up? Sometimes they are, but sometimes other things are stacked on that anger, and it has to have a way of expressing itself. And I think every community should work at that, because if we don't, it will ultimately explode. And so be preemptive and to work together and talk together, I think would be the best thing. And I would recommend that anywhere I would go, is to help people to say, well, what are we feeling here? And it's amazing that if you give someone the opportunity, they can say, well, yes, this concerns me, or this hurts me. Let me tell you, there was a neat experience in our church after one of the meetings. Two African-American ladies were starting an educational thing. And so they were given an opportunity to share it. And what they were doing was taking young people, I forget the age limit, but where they were teaching them the true history of our country. That they realized that a lot of young people didn't know how people got elected to offices and all like that. And so I thought that was beautiful, that people could learn, wait a minute, I'd like to be on the city council. Well, how do you get there? And a lot of people, I don't think they're ever taught, how our educational system or our political system works. And so it includes everybody. Some of us pastors still get together, black and white, and I think that's so important, that we just don't let it drop. But so often that happens, the pressure gets off, and so people go back to doing what they've always done. But some of us, I think in a community like Ferguson, which is about 70% African American and then 30% white, is that we have taken the opportunity to remember each other, talk to each other, do things together, go out to lunch together. And I just personally preached in a black church in Ferguson just a couple of Sundays ago. And that's because we had already known each other a year or so ago. And that some more of that is happening. I just heard about this the other day in a close community to us, Hazelwood. There's about 5 different churches, black and white, change pastors. And so I think things like that are very helpful to have a white pastor in a black church and a black pastor in a white church. And then I think we find out we're not that different. There's one church that I have been invited 3 different times to do their annual annual sermon, and it's amazing. And I sat there on the platform, and I look at each other, and the only difference is skin color. God created us, and so I think it's neat to have those experiences that we're not that different. But the problem is we don't know each other.